to the Weird Warriors podcast. I'm Max,
I'm Rich.
and on this podcast, we normally focus on the Weird War Tales comic book series published by DC Comics from 1971 to 1983. However, on this episode, we're going to explore the unknown and go on a special mission into the files labeled X and take a look at the X Files number 17 from Topps Comics. But first, my fellow agent has a little something to say to you.
Happy 5th birthday to us. May the 4th be with you. X-Files and Star Wars? Holy cultural phenomena. Bet you Max never thought we'd make it to 5 years. No lies detected. Intel report. The War That Time Forgot. A 12-issue mini by DC Comics in 2008. Script by Bruce Jones, pencils largely by Al Barrionuevo, inks initially by Jimmy Palmiotti, which means there's a lot of random assorted inkers in this project. A lone U.S. pilot about to warn his superiors of the attack on Pearl Harbor finds his craft suddenly crash landing on a mysterious island populated with prehistoric creatures and soldiers of wars of the past, present, and future, including Tomahawk, Firehair, and Hans von Hammer, the enemy ace. What bizarre forces compel these military masters of every era to inhabit the same strange territory? Can they survive without killing each other or being devoured by dinosaurs? I had this series originally, but it must not have sat very well with me because I apparently don't have it anymore. Enemy Ace tangled with dinosaurs in a previous Intel report, Guns of the Dragon by Tim Truman, which I do still have, and had Batlash, Biff Bradley, Vandal Savage, and Miss Fear in it. That was pretty good.
Yeah, I bought this War That Time Forgot mini off the shelves when it was coming out, and I remember enjoying it at the time, but I couldn't tell you a thing about it now. So it was fun, like a comic should be, I think, but it wasn't memorable. But Guns of the Dragon, I had that, and I wish I still did. So some things stick with you, some things don't.
Yeah, that one worked. I mean, that was a very fun series. So cover detail. Art by Moran Kim, Michael Greco, and Michael Levine. $2.95. The X-Files is dark red on yellow. Mulder and Scully look at the viewer and flank a TBM Avenger diving towards the water on the top half of the cover. On the bottom half lies the upside-down top half of a gray-skinned man. And the center reads, a World War II Navy pilot lost in the Bermuda Triangle over 40 years ago is back. Thin Air. Cover date, May 1996. Old Comics Man. Seen on eBay for anywhere between $3 and $12. Killjoy? I could bitch about the Avengers photo on the cover being reverse imaged, but it's the X-Files, so never mind.
It's the effect of the Bermuda Triangle, flipping the image around. Woo! So, all right, I'll kick off our comments and commendations on this cover. This is a very DC Vertigo cover image, and it's actually in line with the style that is starting to appear at the time over in that line, specifically as can be seen in Death, The Time of Your Life, and the Sandman Mystery Theater series. If you look at covers from those series and you look at this one, you see, I get what they were going for here. And they almost get it. The likenesses up top of our two main actors slash characters are well done, and the photo collage method is used well with the plane that Rich mentioned in a nosedive between our two protagonists. But as we will also get into with my fellow agent here, it all falls apart into a muddy, monochromatic mess in the bottom half of the image. I could be generous and say that the artist is trying to depict the murkiness of the bottom of the sea, littered with detritus and decay. But I tend to think that the artist was just trying to look like a Vertigo book in the laziest way possible, and Topps wasn't too picky about it. It's not a bad cover, but it's not great either. It's like they just almost got there aping the Vertigo look, which is impressive enough, but they didn't quite land it.
A tale of two halves of a cover. Top half is great. But what's going on the bottom half? There's these weird striations in the body's chest and something that looks like a buoy and a seashell next to it, which it almost certainly is not. Did he get bitten in half by a shark? His throat looks like it was cut too. I don't know. Top half good, bottom half bad. I think overall I gotta give this one a thumbs down though.
Yeah, the bottom drags it down. What do you know?
But um,
So I'm going to step in here and give a little rare company detail on this one for people who aren't familiar with the flash in the pan that was Topps Comics. So they were a division of the Topps Company Incorporated, big surprise, that published comic books from 1993 to 1998. So this is Topps, the sports trading card company, people. They dipped their corporate nose into the comic industry during the speculator boom. So yeah, they began their existence during that short comics industry boom that attracted many investors and new companies. This is back when people thought like a copy of Youngblood #1 was going to pay for your kid's college tuition if you saved it, or the polybagged Death of Superman was going to be worth $1 million someday, this kind of thing. This is where they entered in to our beloved hobbies market. The company was based in New York City at 254 36th Street, Brooklyn. They specialized in licensed titles, particularly movie and television series tie-ins like this one, such as, The X-Files and the films Bram Stoker's Dracula and Jurassic Park. They also licensed such literary properties as Zorro and published a smattering of original series, including Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, and several based on concepts by then retired industry legend Jack Kirby. Topps entered the comic book market as the number of publishers was, let's say, increasing, with at least 9 other companies joining the field from 1990 to 1992. This coincided with the aforementioned increase in comic book market speculation that created inflated sales and eventual collapse of the market. And it also caused a lot of comic shops to have to close. Like there was a serious percentage of shops that in the wake of this 90s speculator boom were just buried under inventory and shut right down. It's a pretty high percentage, kind of depressing. Topps Comics themselves closed in 1998. As for my involvement with this company, I pretty much only read their Kirbyverse and Mars Attacks comics back in the day. I wasn't an X-Files TV show fan really, so I skipped this series entirely, as I will get into later on.
and just to follow up very quickly on that point, the title detail X-Files was published by Topps Comics from issue 0, because of course it's the X-Files, to issue 41 from January 1995 to September 1998. I'm pretty sure I had them all at one point, but I ditched most of them. I think I've only got like 5 or 6 in the long box downstairs anymore, including dun, dun, this one. Starting off with the story itself, Thin Air, 24 pages, script by John Rosen, pencils by Gordon Purcell, inks by Joe Rubinstein. A little bit of a surprise there. Synopsis. At 2:10 p.m. on December 5th, 1945, 5 Avenger torpedo bombers, known as Flight 19, took off from the Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station on what was to be a routine 2-hour training flight. The planes were all in excellent working order and had full fuel tanks. The crewmen were all experienced, and the weather was near perfect. At 3:34 p.m., when Flight 19 was scheduled to request landing instructions, they instead sent a strange message. Control tower, this is an emergency. We seem to be off course. We cannot see land. Repeat, we cannot see land. We don't know which way is west. Everything is wrong. Strange. We can't be sure of any direction. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should. At 4:25, Flight 19 radioed its final message. We're not certain where we are. We must be about 225 miles northeast of base. It looks like we are... Then silence. Flight 19 had vanished. A Martin Mariner flying boat was immediately sent to search for the missing planes. After sending in several routine radio reports, the Mariner vanished as well. None of the 6 planes nor their crews were ever found. Theirs has become the most famous of the many legends of the Bermuda Triangle. Greece, 11:30 p.m., March 11th, 1996. For 7 minutes, the residents of a small coastal village watched with awe as strange lights danced through the sky above them. Then, with a blinding flash, it was over. The lights were gone. No one knew what to make of them. But at 8:20 the following morning, the locals discover a young, confused man sitting on a rock on the beach, wearing the uniform of an American World War II naval aviator. FBI headquarters, 9:20 a.m., March 19th. Dana Scully walks into Fox Mulder's office, who greets her with a photograph. Have you seen today's paper? You mean the one with the headlines about Bosnia? Or the ones that say Elvis returns on UFO with super new diet? Elvis's diet is old news. I'm talking about the article about this man who washed up on a beach in Greece last week. Scully looks at the photo. Who is he? He claims to be a U.S. Navy pilot named John Lawrence, one of the pilots who flew with Flight 19. They disappeared without a trace in the Bermuda Triangle over 50 years ago. This is a picture of John Lawrence about 3 months before his disappearance. Mulder hands Scully a second photograph, who compares the two. Mulder, this is incredible. Surely they can't be the same man. That's what I aim to find out. Lawrence, or whoever he is scheduled to appear on just about every talk show and news program over the next few days. I'm going to try to get an interview of my own. That's it, Mulder. Don't you just see this as another hoax like Jack the Ripper's diary, created to sell a lot of books? You're probably right. There's nothing mysterious about the Bermuda Triangle. The entire phenomenon was concocted by a bunch of hack writers who did almost no research and used the as-if scenario and the omission of essential details, tying together a number of nautical and aviation disasters to make it seem as if something paranormal was going on. There are no more disappearances there than in any other heavily traversed ocean, and most of the disappearances have been explained. The Navy Board of Investigation's report of the incident involving Flight 19 was nearly 400 pages long and leaves no doubt as to what really happened. In truth, all but one of the pilots were inexperienced. Their flight leader, unfamiliar with the area, mistook the Bahamas for the Florida Keys, and without functioning compasses and plagued by poor radio contact with the ground, kept changing flight direction from east to west, all the while drifting farther north. The weather, while fine at takeoff, rapidly deteriorated, so when the planes ran out of fuel, the inexperienced pilots were forced to try a water landing in the dark on rough seas and turbulent winds. Ruthless conditions, but not mysterious. In the popular version of the story, radio messages were received from the flight suggesting they were experiencing something out of the ordinary, either a UFO or parallel dimension. None of those messages appear in the official transcript of the messages received. If that's true, then why are you bothering with it? I need to be sure. The night before the man claiming to be John Lawrence washed up on a beach, a number of UFOs were witnessed by the residents of the town that found him. The man claiming to be John Lawrence is sticking to the popular version of the story, claiming that he and the other pilots were, in fact, abducted. I'm skeptical. But the Air Force claims that the object found at Roswell was a weather balloon, not a spacecraft. If I don't believe that, why should I trust the Navy report? Lawrence sits on a stool in the Channel 4 news studio wearing his flight jacket and being interviewed. All of our compasses stopped working and everything looked wrong. What do you mean by wrong? Asked the interviewer. Well, the light seemed unnatural for one thing. It was hard to tell where the sky stopped and the sea began. Then we saw this object in the sky in front of us. It was hard to see what it was. It was incredibly bright. We tried to fly away from it, but our planes didn't respond. It pulled us right towards it. Then what happened? What happened next will be revealed in the book I'm writing, which should be completed and in stores by July. Oh, please, Scully groans, turning off her TV. U.S. Naval Headquarters, Annapolis, Maryland, March 20th, 10:50 a.m. I'm sorry, Agent Mulder, but I'm going to have to deny your request. The testimony given by Ensign Lawrence during his debriefing has been classified and you aren't cleared to look at it. Lieutenant, are you certain that this man is who he claims to be? Are you sure he's the same Ensign John Lawrence who vanished with the rest of Flight 19? A female aide walks up and hands the lieutenant a manila folder with Lawrence, J.C. on the cover. 100% Agent Mulder. Here's the proof. Back at FBI headquarters, Scully compares Lawrence's fingerprint cards from 1945 and 1996. They're identical. These prints were both made by the same individual. I agree, Mulder says. But was that individual John Lawrence? Dates can be changed. That's why I'm having Lawrence's birth records faxed from his hometowns. Scully looks at the printed fax. These prints belong to the same person as the others. But it still doesn't prove that that person is John Lawrence. Are you saying that the Navy has deliberately replaced all of John Lawrence's medical records with those of some fraud? Why would they do that? I don't know. But it's more believable than a man returning after disappearing for 50 years without having aged a day. Scully returns to her apartment and discovers a manila envelope on the floor that had been slid under her door. She opens it and discovers Lawrence's medical report from 3 days ago. Meanwhile, Mulder goes to a television studio where Lawrence is scheduled to appear and knocks on his dressing room door. My name is Fox Mulder. I'm with the FBI. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Sure, come on in. I don't know if I'll ever be able to catch up. Music I don't understand. America being friends with the Germans and Japanese and enemies of countries I've never even heard of. This thing called the Cold War that came and went while I was away. He picks up a book with Ronald Reagan on the cover. Even a president who was in that Newt Rockney picture. Not to mention the one he was in of the chimp. I don't know that one. I still can't believe this television. The idea when I go out there, millions of people will be able to watch me in their homes at the same time. Jeepers. And these things called computers. I heard that men have even walked on the moon. If you want to be truly stunned, maybe we should get you an adult video. What's that? Never mind. Did you ever find out who won that game? I heard you and some of the other pilots had bet on a game before you took off into the great unknown. Oh, that. The pro football final between the Washington Redskins and the Cleveland Rams. The Redskins won. It's a good thing the rest of my squadron is still missing. I bet on the Rams. Do you remember who was playing for the Rams? Like it was last week. Bob Waterfield was the QB. He was amazing. He was the star of the Rose Bowl when he played for UCLA. Did you know he was married to Jane Russell? And then there was Albie Rice, Jack Jacobs, Steve Nemeth, Frank Girk, Jim Gillette. You don't believe I'm who I say I am. Would you? Probably not. But after what I've been through, what exactly have you been through? Where's the rest of Flight 19? I don't know. You don't know? I'll tell you where they are. They're at the bottom of the Atlantic, still in their planes that went down when they ran out of fuel. They're at the bottom of the ocean because they got lost and confused and started panic flying in circles because no one took charge and made a decisive plan on how to get back to land. They're at the bottom of the ocean with the real Ensign John Lawrence. I am the real John Lawrence. Why can't you believe me? I want to believe you. Someone close to me vanished into thin air like you did. I've been checking every lead I can to get her back, but so many roads I've traveled have been dead ends. I want to believe you're who you say you are, that you've been through what you claim, but I need to be certain. I've lost my family, my friends, my entire world. The only thing I have left is my identity. I know who I am. That's as much certainty as I can give you. Lawrence puts on his flight jacket and leaves the dressing room for the next interview.
Scully talks to Mulder on the phone, flipping through Lawrence's medical documents that she'd received. It appears my luck might be better than yours. I'm holding copies of the results of the medical exam given to Lawrence on his return. There are indications of prolonged exposure to weightlessness, the glucocorticoid release. His lymphocyte population was greatly reduced. There's also notations of scars, which would match those found on others claiming to have been abducted by extraterrestrials. A program on the TV distracts her. After seeing him and talking to him, there's no doubt in my mind that this is the same John Lawrence that I went through basic training with 52 years ago. Here's a picture of us back in 1944. John Lawrence framed it for me himself. Okay, let's take our next caller. Not to question Mr. Chapman's testimony, but it's been 52 years since he's seen John Lawrence, and I swear that he looks exactly like a man named Carl Beverly who worked construction with me last summer. And I'm also sure it's him, because I went to school with him starting in the 6th grade. We graduated high school together. On the other end of Scully's call, Mulder is also watching the same program from the studio. Find out where that call's coming from, he tells her. On the other end of the televised call, a young man furiously paces. Don't put me on hold. First you cut me off, then you... The Lawrence interview is on the young man's TV, and he pauses to watch it. I'm starting to get a lot of mail. People asking if I know where their missing pets or children or spouses are. I don't know. I don't even know where the rest of my squadron is. All I can do is tell them not to give up hope. It took me 50 years, but I came back. Maybe their loved ones will too. Geez, Carl, listen to yourself. What a bunch of bull. The doorbell interrupts the young man's rant. He opens the door to discover 3 men in black suits. Charles Schramm, one of them asks. Will you come with us, please? Elsewhere, Scully meets with a handwriting analyst. At first glance, the signatures look as if they could be written by the same hand. The one in the photograph is more controlled, as if the writer were purposefully trying to keep it legible. The more recent signature looks like it was written in a hurry, but there are definite places where the writer hesitated and was unsure of himself. That would indicate that the person had been practicing, trying to replicate the original signature, and was able to approximate it well enough to fool the casual observer, but wasn't comfortable enough to do it without thinking about it. If this guy really spent the last 50 years in a UFO like he claims, then there might not have been much need for him to sign his name. He may have just forgotten. Fingerprint analysis was next. I'm afraid I cannot tell you who this fingerprint belongs to, but what I can tell you is who it doesn't belong to. It doesn't belong to any known criminal or federal employee, including military personnel, which also means that this print didn't come from the man who lent it to you, since his record's in here. The photo was most likely processed in a home darkroom, so if the person who developed it in 1944 also framed it, then it's probably their print. If this Ernest Chapman claims that person was John Lawrence, then we have a problem, because this print doesn't match those we have for John Lawrence in our files. Later, Mulder calls Scully from a payphone. I'm in Temple, New Hampshire. This is where the caller was from. When I stopped by his house, I was told by a neighbor that 3 men in black paid him a visit, and that he got into a car with them and drove off. I've been asking around town about Carl Beverly. The people here aren't exactly warm and outgoing to start with, and as soon as I mention his name, it's like I become invisible. Sculler updates Mulder on her side of the investigation concerning fingerprints and handwriting before Mulder continues. I'm holding a high school yearbook from 1988. Lawrence's picture is in it, above his real name, Carl Beverly. Get this, in the superlative section, Carl Beverly was chosen as Best Actor. He had a lead role in every school play. I think it's time to bring this charade to an end. FBI Headquarters, Washington, D.C., March 21, 1:40 p.m. Scully sees Mulder as he enters the office. Beverly's gone, he exclaims. I spent all morning going from one of his scheduled appointments to the next. He never showed at any of them. The hotel he was staying at says he never picked up his messages. He hasn't checked out. His belongings are still there. I went through them all and found nothing. Just clothing and some modern history books. The last anyone saw of him was yesterday, shortly after the talk show the caller ID'd him on. He was seen getting into the back of a 1965 black Cadillac with 2 men in black suits and sunglasses. He's gone, Scully. Vanished back into thin air. You know what? I was willing, eager in fact, to dismiss it all as a hoax perpetrated by a clever and ambitious young man with visions of dollar signs from book sales in his head. But now, I don't know. The sightings of men in black coinciding with the disappearances of both Beverly and the caller lead me to believe that something more is involved here. You're right, there is. The fingerprints lifted from Chapman's photograph match those belonging to the real John Lawrence. So does the handwriting. After I got off the phone with you, I went to visit a friend of my father's. She hands Mulder a thick folder and starts leafing through it. He's shocked. These are John Lawrence's files, the authentic ones. Where did you... My father had this friend, a retired Navy captain whose post-retirement hobby was searching for the wreckage of Flight 19. 6 years ago, he gave up. He decided he was getting too old to go chasing after ghosts. He had copies of all the pertinent records, which he held onto in case anyone wanted to pick up where he left off. He was so angry about the John Lawrence imposter that he was eager to hand these over so that we could expose him. It's a little late for that. With Beverly gone, there's not much to expose. It doesn't matter anymore. We know he's a fake. It's time for us to forget about him and move on to other things. It's not that simple, Scully. There's still the bizarre circumstances under which the supposed John Lawrence arrived and departed, not to mention the complexity of switching all the original records. Scully continues, I went through that yearbook you brought back and matched the name of one of Beverly's classmates with an employee in Naval Records. He didn't show up for work this morning, and he's not home either. I checked. This goes way beyond trying to perpetrate a hoax against the public. Someone sent us on a wild goose chase on purpose. They had to know that sooner or later someone who knew Carl Beverly would recognize him. Why go through the trouble of replacing all of Lawrence's records if they knew that Beverly would be exposed as an imposter anyway? Why have Beverly and the only witness to positively identify him disappear under mysterious circumstances? Doing so clearly suggests there's something deeper going on. Why bother with the return of John Lawrence in the first place? Mulder pauses. Scully. Where's the best place to hide a book? In a library? Exactly. When one person claims to be the love child of Elvis Presley, it's a possibility. When a bunch of people claim the same thing, it becomes an unfunny joke. So what you're saying is that someone deliberately sent out a fake John Lawrence so that anyone else claiming to be John Lawrence would be scoffed at. And by having his imposter vanish mysteriously, you make his claims all the more possible. A new John Lawrence's credibility would be laughable. What makes you think a second person might come along claiming to be John Lawrence? Because I think maybe the real John Lawrence has returned, and whoever set this hoax up knows it. If he is back, and he's as young as when he disappeared, I'd like to know how he stayed that way. That night, Scully types her report. It wasn't until that point that I truly understood Mulder's unflagging interest in the John Lawrence mystery. It gave him hope. During his search for his missing sister, Mulder had been feeling the constant pressure of a ticking clock. He was racing against time. If Lawrence had really been abducted and returned unaged after having been missing for 51 years, then why wouldn't the same hold for Samantha, who's only been missing for 13? If she returned as a 9-year-old girl, she'd finally get to experience the childhood of which she was robbed. She'd return as the sister Mulder remembered losing. I leave my skepticism unspoken. Mulder needs his faith, but if Lawrence has truly returned, there's no sign, and neither of us has any idea where to look. At a camp, somewhere in a tropical setting, the crewmen of Flight 19 stand in formation and are debriefed by a man in a dark suit. John Lawrence is one of them. I understand your desires to return home and to see your families. I must ask you to continue your patience. There is still much you must learn and prepare for before you are returned to the world. Dismissed. As the crewmen drift off, the speaker is handed a clipboard by another man. Every one of them is accounted for. The entire flight. How long do you think before they can go home? The speaker, cigarette-smoking man, snorts. Home? They can never be allowed to leave. From now on, this is their home. The end. Cue the spooky theme music.
Killjoy was here, History Minute. Another comic that has no page numbers, so the review portion of their show requires a bit of work. However, as spoiled last time, damn it, page 1, panel 1. The Avengers have pre-war national insignia on the wings and fuselage. It's about 4 years out of date here. Page 2, panel 1. What kind of flight helmet is that? Panel 3. The national insignia on the Mariner is different from that on the Avengers and is also wrong for this time period. Page 9, panel 4. That is one old-looking lieutenant. A Navy lieutenant is the equivalent to a captain in the Army in 03. Either give him more rank or make him look younger. Page 10, panel 1. The dates on the fingerprint cards are wrong. The story takes place in March 1996. The card is dated 1995. Lawrence wasn't back yet. Newt Rockney came out in 1940. The chimpanzee movie Bedtime Robonzo came out in 1951, so those references are correct. The Cleveland Rams played in Cleveland from 1936 to 1945, with play suspended in 1943 because of the war. They moved to Los Angeles in 1946, to St. Louis in 1995, and back to LA in 2016. One of the biggest gotcha moments in the history of the show coming up. Too bad Mulder wasn't a bigger football fan, or he might have caught this. The Redskins did not win the championship game against the Rams. They lost 15-14 on December 15th, 1945, 10 days after Flight 19 vanished. So they got that right anyway. Everything else Lawrence said about the Rams players was accurate, though. Pre-Super Bowl era. And I also caught a bit of time compression in this story. Mulder went from Annapolis at 11 a.m. on March 20th to New Hampshire, conducted his investigation, and was back in D.C. to spend all morning of March 21st looking for Beverly. Okay, Barry Allen. An interesting call out on the next to last panel of the story, where the names of the missing crewmen are listed. You can see 7 names on the top page. 5 of the 7 are the real names of the pilots of the Avengers: Charles Taylor, Edward Powers, Joseph Bossy, George Stivers, and Forrest Gerber. The other 2 names weren't on either the Mariner or the Avengers. Come on. If you can find 5 names, you can find 2 more. or just show 5 names on the top sheet of the clipboard. There was no John Lawrence on Flight 19 or the Mariner, and I guess I can reluctantly get on board with creating him for the story so as to not make light of a dead man's name. Not that that has never been done before or will continue to be done. I will also continue to remind our listeners on every opportunity that my great uncle, Ensign Joseph Jewell, flew to TBM Avengers off the USS Enterprise during World War II and was wounded in the Japanese attack that knocked the Big E out of the war. Mulder's version of what happened to Flight 19 is pretty accurate, but the missing Mariner seaplane is never again addressed after page 2. It vanished from radar 20 minutes after taking off after one radio check-in. A vessel in the area reported seeing a fireball and found an oil slick, and the PBM is believed to have been destroyed in a mid-air explosion off the coast of Florida near the Bahamas, but no remains of the seaplane or its crew were ever found. The Mariner was known as the flying gas can because of its tendency to leak fumes, which could certainly explain the mid-air blast. As the Navy History and Heritage Command version of the story tells it, now 6 aircraft with personnel had vanished. For 5 days, Coast Guard, Navy, and Naval Aviation personnel searched extensively in more than 250,000 square miles of Atlantic and Gulf waters, but nothing was found. No aviators, wreckage, life raft, or even an oil slick. Nothing. The Navy launched an investigation into the incident, but nothing conclusive was found. 14 men were lost as a result of the Flight 19 tragedy. 13 more were lost from the PBM Mariner attempted rescue. 27 men, literally gone. Comments and commendations. I'm not familiar with Gordon Purcell, but getting Joe Rubenstein to ink this book was a definite plus. No killjoys for the aircraft drawing either, just their insignias. The Avengers and Mariner are accurate, though maybe their propeller arcs could have been bigger. The big part of a mystery comic like this is the fact that I, anyway, had very few art callouts. It's all about the body language, the hair, the eyes. Hell, I acknowledge most of mine are for writing, which is rare, like the last panel on page 8 where Scully is, "Oh, please," about Lawrence wanting everyone to buy his book. I'm sorry, that crap don't work for me. You read it and tell me how it went. Never mind the book deal. 51 years of back pay would be a pretty sweet bonus also, because all those guys that get taken prisoner of war, they get all that pay back when they get repatriated. Page 11 is a no talking page where Scully finds Lawrence's file in her apartment. Why are her eyes closed in every panel? I got a bit of a Captain America vibe when Lawrence is talking to Mulder in the dressing room. Probably the best sequence in the book. The part about the adult video on page 12, panel 4 got a chuckle out of me. Same for the chimp reference. The 1988 high school yearbook on page 18, panel 2, in a phone booth. I graduated high school in 1988. That's why I'm so creaky now. It's like, I'm okay with a brief C&C for such a long-winded synopsis, and I'm quite sure Max will have plenty to add.
Oh, I do. And before I dive into it, people, as much as I murdered my reading of Rich's synopsis, which I will edit out at great effort, because man, I fell down the stairs through that one. His synopsis is much clearer, like it is a lot of times, than the actual story as delivered in this comic book. And that's kind of where I'm going with my C&C. The short version of it is, there's a really good story here, but it's submerged beneath fathoms and fathoms of bungled execution. That's really it. If you want to skip forward after that, I don't blame you. But if you're in it for the long version, here we go. Right on page 1. I am not one who normally cares over much about this sort of thing, but damn, what a tonal shift in art styles from cover to interiors. This is far more disconcerting than the shift people always go on about, referring to Gold Key Comics and their painted covers and the interior art. That's for sure. The cover is all moody, artsy, vertigo, avant-garde with its vibes. And then the interiors look like an early 80s superhero comic book, right down to the pretty flat coloring. The art is competent, for sure. It's actually pretty good. It's just not the style I would pick for an X-Files series at all. Now, onto the writing and art throughout the issue. Much like the divide between the cover and the interior art, the art and writing inside this entire comic book seem torn between some very old school methods and some attempts at more modern storytelling techniques. And all of this just more or less gets in its own way and kind of sabotages the entire production. To wit, Pages 1 to 3 have only one panel of dialogue spoken by an actual on-panel character. It's all caption-based exposition and huge panels taking up way too much real estate. And to point it out here, part of that real estate is, in panel 3 of page 2, a close-up of water. Okay, that's it. There's nothing, it's just waves. Panel 5 of page 3 even specifically mentions a blinding flash in the narrative caption. And if anything, the panel with that caption looks as though it's depicting the moment where the lights finally faded out, if anything. On page 4, it's only by having read the cover blurb that one can piece together what is supposed to have happened here. And the redheaded kid behind the pilot looks like he's having a, oh geez, not again, sitcom moment more than anything else. Page 5, I feel, should have been page 1 of this comic, as Mulder, Scully, no names are given yet for these characters, gives pretty much all the information the first 3 pages gave us in his one solitary word balloon. The best touch on this page was the fact that the pilot's reappearance in modern times happened on March 12th, and our nameless heroes are only discussing it on March 19th. Ah, the speed of print. You know what? I kind of miss it. Kind of miss having a delay between things happening and us hearing about them. It's almost like it gave people time to think about it. I'm probably imagining things. On page 6, panel 1, we finally get a character name. But since we can't absolutely tell whose hands are in frame here, we don't technically know which one of the characters is Mulder, since no faces are on panel when the name is finally dropped. You can piece it out that the photos were just handed over to the redheaded woman, but you got to do that work yourself, and you shouldn't have to. Panel 3 gives us the most egregious, perhaps, of the "this is a media adaptation with licensed likenesses that we paid for, damn it," headshots in the issue, with a huge headshot and tons of words. I gotta wonder if Duchovny, the actor who played this, again, so far, well, technically named character, would be a little pissed at how they drew his head on this page. Actually, especially with the forehead they gave him up in panel 2. Page 6 is also a good example of a common problem I have with this particular comic book. It's a 4-panel page, as most of them are in this book, and I checked. The 4-panel page here would have worked far better if it had 6 panels instead, and that's something I could have kept saying, so I just put it in the 1 bullet point here, I think. Page 7 briefly turns things around with an actually interesting bit of page design, and the look on the unnamed woman's, we know it's Scully, but I'm just picking on the comic book here, with her face in panel 3 is really well drawn and believable. It's one of the best pages in the book from my perspective. I also really like, again, following it right up, the TV screen to TV studio, back to TV screen, back to unnamed woman's place, page design used for page 8. That's also really good. So 2 in a row, showing some effort here, breaking out of the mold. And as Rich mentioned, Scully's disgust with the inevitable announcement of Lawrence's upcoming book is perfectly portrayed. It's a really great drawing. There's a lot of great art in this book. I'm going to be picking on it a lot, but this is good looking stuff for the most part. I'll hold up here and give you a little mercy and hold up a bit on the page-by-page commentary and just say that the book has a habit of not naming characters, not indicating or naming changes of location, and dumping tons of word balloons all over the place, where at least a couple different methods of exposition would have broken things up for the reader. This is absolutely a comic book made for people who are definitely familiar with the TV show, and perhaps that's fair, but it all kind of ends up feeling to me like a pitch for the plot of an episode of the show, hoping to be turned into a script, rather than a comic book meant to be picked up by people who might be attracted to the show through the comic book. It's dense and rushed in parts and empty and confusing in others. So that, believe me, sums up a lot of the commentary that I was going to stretch this out even further with. I erased a lot of bullet points. A great example of what I consider to be this issue's flaws can be found on page 11, if you want to boil it down. While Rich already rightfully brought it up, it's not even made clear that what's-her-name has changed locations. She could just be closing the door of the room she was in on the previous page, not opening the door to a different room. I mean, Did they use all the captions for this page back on pages 1 to 3? It's an utter waste of space and confusing to boot. This is the sequence Rich described where Scully, who is still not named in this comic book on page 11, is returning to her place and finds that envelope slid under the door. I challenge you, without knowing all that, to make sense of the previous page and this one as a matter of reading continuity. It's just a mess. On the first panel of page 14, Mulder one-ups his previous holy license likeness syndrome with some much better photo reference work on display. I get it, but still. It's a thing in licensed comics that is so obviously not driven by storytelling choices that it's kind of comical to behold. I read a lot of, I should say, I didn't put this in the script, but I've read a lot of licensed Star Trek comics, people, so I'm not unfamiliar with this tendency. I'll put up with a lot of it in my Star Trek comics where it's like unnecessary, very clear face shot. So I do understand it. It's not a huge problem I have with this book. And here we go, folks. Turning the page. Scully is finally named on page 15, panel 4 of an X-Files comic. Amazing. As Rich predicted, I did appreciate the guy who narked on the pilot impersonator, who is named more or less immediately when he appears in the comic, but then never seen again. I do appreciate the fact that he's wearing an Anthrax t-shirt, because, not just because I'm a fan of the band, but it's more than likely that Scott Ian and Charlie Benante, the rhythm guitarist and drummer, respectively, of Anthrax, were big enough fans of the show to have picked this issue up because they're both also comic book nerds. So I'm pretty sure they got a kick out of it too. Page 17 amounts to a pile of words that actually makes it harder to understand what the deal is with the fingerprints. You could honestly rip most of it right out of the book and still understand the plot just as well in the end. Now, Rich made that sequence make a lot more sense in his synopsis. That's one clear example of what I'm talking about here. If you read this page and then you read what Rich wrote in the synopsis, it's like Rich should have been the editor of this comic book. Pages 18 and 19 have no transitional info readily available on them. Big surprise. At least put the FBI HQ that is typed info at the top of the page turn panel, huh? Like it's there, but they have it dropped down to the bottom of the page. So when you turn the page, you don't see it. It's down here at the bottom corner. No, why? You put it there. Just put it where the reader's at. Page 20 is, again, overly focused on showing off likenesses and hammering the reader with words rather than telling a visually interesting comic book story. Like, they could have shown a panel of Mulder interviewing people or the MIB picking up Beverly, like, in silhouette or something as Mulder's narrating these things. You could have dropped out to a caption with some silhouetted panels of the action going on that he was describing and that he was imagining even happening in his head. But no, it's just Mulder's face, word balloon attached. It's just visually dull, and there's too much of it in this issue that looks exactly the same. By page 21, I had personally lost the plot, or really much interest in finding it. I read that page a few times, and I have no idea why the prints on Chapman's photo prove what they are said to prove, or for that matter, who the hell Chapman even is. At this point, I've forgotten what that name is even connected to reading this comic book. Again, Rich's synopsis keeps a much better through line than what's on these pages. Or he just read it more times than I did, or was able to follow it more easily than me, which is perfectly possible too. But hey, there's very little to visually distinguish pages 20 through 23 from each other. They look so much the same. I get it that it's a comic book about people talking to each other, but use coloring, use something, use something to make these pages look different from each other. I could just swap the word balloons around to the different pages and I doubt it would matter much. But I gotta say, I really did appreciate Mulder's insanely paranoid 1966 Batman TV show style logic on display in page 23. It's easily the scariest thing in the book, in my opinion, where he's like, obviously, the people wanted the fake Lawrence to come into the spotlight so that it's like, that's how his brain works. That's terrifying. That worked for me on so many levels. I was like, this is an X-Files comic right here. You're getting a peek into the brain of this man who is that deep into this stuff that he's so crazy, and maybe this is why they named him Fox, that he's actually right about this stuff. And I'm not a big X-Files fan, but that one panel, that explanation by him kind of got me a better view into the TV series than I've ever had in my life, I think. So here we go. I finally made it. Page 24. The end of the comic book, the end of my CNC. I fully admit the twist behind all of this is actually really cool. I loved it. The fact that Mulder was right, how sinister it all is. I like that we pull away to see these guys being debriefed on the island. As I've said a few times, I hope the story in this comic, the story it's trying to tell is really cool. I like the story now that I understand it, despite the comic book itself. However, in panel 2 of this page, the image of the pilot seemingly projected onto Mulder's wall is more jarring than transitional. They at least tried for some transitional action here, but it looks like someone is projecting an image onto the wall of his office. And of course, the head spook, who is debriefing the actually returned pilots of Flight 19, is, I'll let you guess, not named in the comic book at all. And he seems to say that these pilots are in fact never going home right in front of them, even though, again, Rich put it in the synopsis as the pilots filter away. You don't see that. They could still be standing right there as far as the comic is concerned. So it's like, these guys are never going home. And I can see the pilots going, what? We're right here. That all just happened. It made it a little amusing at the end, but that all just happened in my head, people. There we go. That is my long-winded CNC for this comic, which it sounds like I very much couldn't stand, but actually had a blast reading and analyzing. So that's how it goes sometimes with me.
I think the head spook. I don't think he's ever named. I think in show lore, he is identified as cigarette smoking man. You never find out who he is. That's what he's called.
Yeah, that's fair. And
he was a recurring actor because he was always that
someone,
guy stirring the pot.
Yeah, I get that from you, and I kind of did know that going in, even though I've only seen like 5 or 6 episodes of X-Files my whole life. But I was still thinking, I was making myself think of this as, I didn't watch the TV show. I'm picking up this comic. How does that hit me? And I'm like, yet another character. They don't mention his name. Like I already, like I said, kind of knew that guy never had a name, but it's like, put something in there to that effect. The cue in the reader that this is what's happening. And there's almost no effort in this comic to do that at any point because, again, I do understand that they probably only intended the X-Files faithful to pick up this comic, which would have meant the sales numbers would be excellent. So why worry about it? Like, I do get that. Like, they weren't worried about sales numbers because the X-Files fan base was not small. So I do understand that. I'm just trying to analyze it in a vacuum, which made it a lot of fun for me. But yeah, that is, they couldn't say the cigarette smoking man because he's also, I mean, is he called that by any words in the TV show ever?
I don't think
Right,
so.
right. So
I
he
think
just doesn't have a
he's
name.
just the face you always recognized. Oh, this dude again.
Yeah. So yeah, to fans of the show, they're not going to have like 50% of the problems I had with this issue probably. But I was going in as like someone who was at least pretending to even have less knowledge of the show than I did. So there we go. For a short while, people, I'm going to shut up for a minute.
Yeah. All of the ads are largely dull house ads or for X Files merchandise or the like. So we're not going to do an ad call out because meh. And there's a letters page, but it's called Gray Matters. But again, the letters are for issues of the book we haven't reviewed, so going over them would be meaningless for all parties involved. So we're skipping that too, which brings us all the way up to, do you got any last words? And just like it was non-negotiable that we had to do an issue of The Twilight Zone, and we may do another, spoiler, we had to do an issue of The X-Files. The only other issue that had a weird war feel to it was issue 38 titled Cam Ranh Bay, set in the aftermath of the Vietnam War. The story follows Mulder and Scully as they investigate a series of mysterious deaths of dolphin trainers. The dolphins involved were originally part of a military operation in Vietnam, and now it appears that someone is controlling them, causing them to revert to their earlier training. I think I went with this one just because of the fame factor, because we've joked on the show before about the Bermuda Triangle. Remember the very beginning of Close Encounters of the Third Kind dealt with Flight 19 when the Avengers were discovered in pristine condition in Mexico's Sonoran Desert, and the crews were returned at the end of the movie. Also, as mentioned a couple times, the X-Files Preservation Collection is headquartered in nearby, for me, Saratoga Springs. It's the largest collection of X-Files artifacts in the world. It consists of thousands of props, costumes, set dressings, memorabilia, and behind-the-scenes production materials from the hit TV series, spanning the complete history of the franchise. It opened on April 30th, 2022. Creator Chris Carter was there to cut the ribbon. A Road Warriors episode is in the planning stages. The best thing is about Topps Comics is that all of these ads are in the back of the book. There was no interruption to the story at all, which was great. As usual, the story had a aha moment at the end, which pisses you off a little bit. The bad guys always seemed to win in this series, didn't they? No one trusted the government 30 years ago. And with the advent of social media, everyone has a soapbox now to spew their own specific conspiracy theory du jour. It's much worse now, regardless of what side of the political aisle you're on. This was good.
All right. For my actual last words here, I got to ask you folks, do you really want more from me right now? Okay. Obviously, I clearly disagree that this was a good comic book. And as you've no doubt all put together, I don't think that's solely the fault of it being written pretty much for fans of the TV show and no one else. But even after all the negging I did in my exhaustive and exhausting CNC, what bothers me most about this issue is, as I've said, there really is a very cool story in here. It's just delivered so awkwardly on so many levels that I want to send it back for a full do-over, perhaps by a different creative team, and perhaps with Rich Fulham as the editor. Like I really think you missed a career there, man, as being like a comic book editor. So many killjoys and storytelling gaffes would have been erased under your unwavering gaze. I've only ever seen, as I just mentioned, about 5 or so episodes of the X-Files TV series. But I hope the plots were delivered with more skill and coherency than those elements of this comic book were. So that's my last words on this issue, people. Don't be mad. Doesn't mean I hate the X-Files or any of these creators. I really think this comic book was like caught in a transitionary time, to use the word transition again, and that the style of like a Vertigo comic was just starting to become a thing, like a codified thing. But most comics were still in the classic style from the mid to late 80s. And this book was caught bang right in the middle of it. And person who did the cover and the people who did the interiors were only kind of ready for it. You can see how like the cover was literally torn in half by this urge to mimic something. And the inside, you had obviously classically trained people trying to do a more modern style comic. So it was a very interesting mess for me to dissect. Now I'm done. I promise. You made it. You made it past all that. And you've gotten to the scuttlebutt. It's the end of the show where I mentioned to you we have a Facebook page run by Rich. It's the Weird Warriors Podcast Facebook page. It's awesome. We have merch available on redbubble.com. Search our name, the Weird Warriors Podcast. Get our logo, which was very graciously and awesomely illustrated by Bill Walko. That's Walko. Look him up, people. I have commissions by the guy from before we even wanted to do a podcast. His art's it's right up my alley. He did a Blue Devil sketch for me. I like the guy. Right? You could get that kick-ass piece of art, put on a piece of merch, sent to your house. You can send a picture of it once it gets to your place to the Facebook page via Facebook Messenger. Rich will send you a Sam star. That's Sam as in Sam Klansman, people. Just to remind you what he still has in his hands and shouldn't have anymore. And he'll send you that with a certificate of authenticity just for buying some merch and helping pay the podcast Podbean storage fees for the show. That's what that'll do. All right. We also have a YouTube page, which I swear one day I'm going to do that final sit down and upload the episodes to current before it becomes 2 or 3 sit downs that I have to do. I swear. But that's where you can listen to, you can watch, but I'm only going to put an image of the comic book cover up on each video. So you don't have to look at us, or more to the point, me, on these YouTube videos. If that's where you'd rather listen to your podcast content, we are there for you. Okay. So that's it. That's my part of the scuttlebutt. And I'm turning the keys over to Rich for the more entertaining part of the scuttlebutt.
Let voting for the 2026 listeners selected Intel Report Special Mission conclude. The official selections: Fanboy 4, Loafroff 1946, Eden Frost, What If 71, Bombshells, Doctor Who the 10th Doctor 6 to 9, Kronos Commandos, We Stand on Guard, Catch Shit 1, The Dark and the Bloody, Warbirds, Hell Hunters, Super Soldier, Man of War, Baltimore, Cold Dead, War, The Crows, Getting the Wool, The Silver Lake, Alien Armageddon 1944, What Were They Thinking, and Earth Divers, because you've heard this enough times already. Details in the Intel Report album or the pinned post. As always, if the fans decide to coordinate and select a book from outside of that time period, your wishes will be honored. Vote on the FB page or message us. Last chance, people. We'll keep the posts of the selections pinned on the FB page. So what's left? There's only one thing left. It's the teaser for the next episode. Going back to the title, Weird War Tales, number 81. Collectors, Swamp Things, a new war for us. What the hell can it possibly mean? See you soon.
Is it the War of the Roses? Is it a thumb war? Who knows? I'll find out the same time you guys find out, pretty much, when we cover that episode, or when we cover that comic book in the next episode of this show. And what show is this? You may have forgotten by now. It's the Weird Warriors podcast. And who am I? I'm Max. He's Rich. We're the Batlin Bros. We're the Weird Warriors. We're the agents on the scene for this episode of this show. And this is a show where Agent Rich and Agent Max promise to make war.
No.